Life is a cycle. First, we are helpless babies relying on our parents. Then we grow strong and independent, building our own paths. But as we age, the cycle threatens to turn back, making us once again dependent, this time on our children. Many believe it's natural for children to care for their elderly parents, and indeed, love and family bonds are powerful. But is it fair? Is it wise? I have seen too many friends, proud and capable in their youth, surrender their independence to their children, only to find disappointment. Some were treated well, others not so much. But even in the best cases, relying too much on children can create tension, guilt, and resentment. And as much as they love us, they have their own lives, struggles, and responsibilities. That's why I believe we must take charge of our own future. We must plan ahead, think realistically, and make choices that allow us to grow old with dignity. Here are 8 things I have learned about why we should never leave our old age in the hands of our children. Your children have their own lives. When we were young, we worked hard to build a life for ourselves and our families. We had dreams, responsibilities, and goals. Our children were at the center of our world, but we were not at the center of theirs. As they grew, they developed their own aspirations, careers, relationships, and struggles. If we place the responsibility of our old age on their shoulders, we risk becoming a burden they never asked for. Love and duty are powerful forces, but they do not erase the reality of modern life. Many of our children are already struggling with careers, financial obligations, their own children, and even their health. Adding the full-time responsibility of caring for an aging parent can be overwhelming. I have seen it happen. A friend of mine, a proud and independent man in his younger years, moved in with his son when he could no longer care for himself. At first, everything seemed fine. But soon, the small sacrifices his son and daughter-in-law had to make turned into bigger ones. The house became crowded. There were arguments about finances. His son loved him, but he also had a demanding job, and his wife felt like she was losing her own life. The situation created tension, guilt, and unspoken frustration. My friend felt like a burden, though no one dared to say it. His son felt trapped between his father's needs and his own obligations. The relationship suffered. What started as an act of love slowly turned into a quiet struggle. Our children should not have to choose between their happiness and their love for us. When we make them responsible for our old age, we place them in an impossible situation, and even the strongest love cannot erase the pressures of reality. Instead of assuming our children will take care of us, we must plan for our own future. We must ensure that we have the financial stability, resources, and independence to live with dignity. We raised our children to be free, to chase their dreams, and to build their own families. We should not hold them back when they are finally able to live their own lives. This is not about rejecting help or pushing away love. It is about making sure our children love us because they want to, not because they feel obligated. It is about preserving relationships, not straining them. And most of all, it is about keeping our dignity intact. Dependence can lead to lost dignity. There is nothing more painful than feeling like a burden. When we were young, we were strong, independent, and capable. We built homes, raised children, worked hard, and made sacrifices without ever asking for anything in return. We took pride in being self-sufficient. But as we age, we start to lose some of that control over our lives. If we are not careful, we may find ourselves in a position where we must ask for help for even the smallest things. At first, our children will help us out of love. They will offer their time, their energy, and their support. But as the years go by, the balance may shift. What starts as small favors, helping with groceries, driving us to doctor's appointments, can slowly turn into full-time caregiving. Our once proud independence fades, replaced by a constant reliance on our children. And what happens then? We lose the ability to make our own choices. We become dependent not just on their kindness, but also on their schedules, their availability, their moods. We may have to ask permission for things we once did without thinking, going out, spending money, making decisions about our own health. I once knew a man, a retired teacher, who lived with his daughter and her family. At first, he was grateful to be with them. But over time, things changed. His daughter meant well, but she began treating him like a child. She decided what he ate, when he went out, and even what television programs were appropriate for him. She managed his finances and questioned his spending. Whenever he asked for something, she reminded him how much she had already done for him. He was safe, he was cared for, but he was not free. That is the danger of dependence. When we give up control over our lives, we risk losing not just our freedom, but also our dignity. Even the most loving children may start to see us differently, not as the strong, capable people we once were, but as weak, needy, and helpless. And once that perception changes, it is hard to get it back. This is why it is so important to prepare for old age while we still have time. Financial security, a clear plan for the future, and a strong support system outside of our children can allow us to maintain our dignity and independence. We should not have to rely on someone else's goodwill to decide how we live our final years. Respect is not something that can be demanded. It must be preserved. And the best way to keep our dignity is to never place ourselves in a position where it can be taken away. Family love doesn't guarantee good care. Many people believe that no one will take better care of them than their own children. After all, we raised them with love, sacrificed for them, and guided them through life. We assume that when the time comes, they will do the same for us. But love, no matter how deep, does not always translate into good care. Caring for an elderly parent is not just about love. It requires time, patience, energy, and sometimes even medical knowledge. Our children may love us deeply, but that does not mean they are prepared to meet our needs. They have their own families, jobs, and responsibilities. No matter how much they care, they may not have the time or resources to provide the kind of care we truly need. I once knew a woman who moved in with her son when she could no longer live alone. He loved her dearly, but he worked long hours, and his wife was already overwhelmed with their own children. At first, they tried to manage, but as her health declined, things became harder. She needed help with bathing, dressing, and eating, but they had no experience in caregiving. Simple things, like getting her in and out of bed, became a daily struggle. She often felt like she was in the way, apologizing for needing help. Eventually, the stress took a toll on everyone. Her son and daughter-in-law grew frustrated, not because they didn't love her, but because they were exhausted. She started to feel like a problem that needed to be handled, rather than a mother who was cherished. The love remained, but the dynamic had changed. This is a reality that many elderly parents face. Even the most devoted children can struggle under the weight of caregiving. Without proper support, they may become resentful, guilty, or even neglectful, not because they don't care, but because they are overwhelmed. And in some unfortunate cases, frustration can lead to unintentional mistreatment. That is why we must think carefully about our future. Instead of assuming our children will take care of us, we should ensure we have access to professional care if we need it. Whether it is a retirement home, in-home caregivers, or financial resources to support our independence, having a plan can prevent unnecessary hardship. Our children should love us as their parents, not see us as a duty or an obligation. By preparing for our own future, we allow them to remain our children, not our caregivers, not our nurses, but simply our family. And that is the best way to preserve the love between us. Financial dependence can lead to conflict. Money has always been a sensitive subject, even in the closest families. When we were young, we worked hard to provide for our children, ensuring they had everything they needed to succeed in life. But as we grow older, our financial situation changes. If we are not prepared, we may find ourselves depending on our children for money, housing, and medical expenses. And no matter how much they love us, financial dependence can create tension, resentment, and even conflict. I have seen it happen many times. An old friend of mine, a retired factory worker, had little savings and no pension. He moved in with his daughter and her husband, believing they would take care of him, just as he had taken care of her when she was a child. At first, they welcomed him warmly, but as his medical expenses grew, so did the financial strain. His daughter and son-in-law started arguing over money. Who would pay for his medicine, his special diet, his doctor visits? He could hear them whispering at night, their voices tense with frustration. His daughter started reminding him about the costs of everything. "Dad, do you really need that extra medication? Maybe we should switch to a cheaper doctor. We're trying our best, but we also have bills to pay." He never wanted to be a burden, but now he felt like one. The love between them remained, but financial stress had put a dark cloud over their relationship. This is the danger of relying on children financially. Even in the best families, money can create pressure. No matter how kind our children are, they have their own families to support, their own future to secure. When an elderly parent depends on them financially, it can lead to feelings of guilt, frustration, and even arguments between siblings about who should contribute more. In some cases, financial dependence can even lead to abuse. I have heard heartbreaking stories of elderly parents who were pressured to sign over their pensions, sell their homes, or give up their savings to their children. Sometimes this happens out of desperation, other times out of selfishness. Either way, it leaves the elderly parent vulnerable and powerless. This is why we must plan ahead. Saving money, investing in a pension, and ensuring we have financial stability in our later years is not just about comfort. It is about maintaining our dignity and protecting our relationships. When we are financially independent, we give our children the freedom to love us without the stress of financial obligation. We raise them to be free and strong. Let's not become a burden that holds them back. Let's take responsibility for our own financial future so that love, not money, is what defines our relationship with our children. Living with your children can lead to a loss of freedom. Freedom is one of the most precious things we have, and we often don't realize its value until we start losing it. When we were younger, we made our own decisions: what to eat, where to go, how to spend our days. But when we move in with our children or become dependent on them, our freedom can slowly slip away, often in ways we never expected. At first, it might seem like a small sacrifice. We may have to adjust to a new routine, eat meals at certain times, or follow house rules we never had before. But as time goes on, we may find that our choices become more and more limited. When we live in someone else's home, even if it belongs to our own children, we are no longer in control. I knew a man who was once the head of his household. He was independent, made his own choices, and lived life on his own terms. But when he moved in with his daughter, everything changed. Suddenly, he had to ask permission for things he used to do freely. His daughter meant well, but she started making decisions for him. What time he should wake up, what doctor he should see, even what kind of hobbies were appropriate for him at his age. One day, he wanted to take a walk in the evening, something he had done his entire life. But his daughter stopped him. "It's too cold outside," she said. "You might fall." He insisted, but she refused, and because he depended on her for everything, he had no choice but to listen. It wasn't about love, it was about control. And control, even when disguised as care, is still a restriction of freedom. This is the reality many elderly parents face. Even in the most loving households, when we live under someone else's roof, we must follow their rules. We may not be able to watch the TV shows we like, cook the food we enjoy, or go out whenever we please. And while our children's intentions may be good, the truth is that we are no longer fully in charge of our own lives. This is why it is so important to maintain independence for as long as possible. Whether it means living in our own home, moving to a retirement community, or having a plan for assisted living, staying in control of our own lives allows us to age with dignity. We spent our whole lives making our own choices. We should not give up that freedom just because we are getting older. If we plan ahead, we can ensure that our final years are lived on our own terms, not under someone else's rules. Your presence may cause unintentional family conflicts. When we move in with our children or become deeply involved in their lives, we may assume that we are simply becoming part of the family dynamic. However, what we often fail to consider is how our presence, no matter how loving or well-intended, can sometimes create conflicts between our children and their spouses, their own children, or even between siblings. I once knew an elderly woman who moved in with her son and his wife after her health began to decline. She never asked for much and tried her best to be helpful. But as time passed, small tensions began to build. Her daughter-in-law felt like she was no longer in control of her own home. Little things, like how the kitchen was arranged or what time meals were prepared, became sources of disagreement. The son found himself caught between his wife and his mother. He loved them both, but couldn't make both happy at the same time. His wife wanted her own space and privacy. His mother wanted to feel included and cared for. Every decision, where to go for vacations, what to do on weekends, even what to watch on TV, became a silent battle between his duty as a son and his role as a husband. The situation became even more complicated when their teenage children started feeling frustrated. They were used to having freedom in their home, but now they had to be quiet so their grandmother could rest. They loved her, but they also felt like they had lost a part of their own space. No one wanted to admit it, but tension grew every day. The son felt guilty. The daughter-in-law felt overwhelmed. And the elderly mother, sensing the tension, felt unwanted, even though no one ever said it out loud. This is a common story. Even in the most loving families, having an elderly parent move in can shift the balance of relationships. A house that once felt peaceful can start feeling crowded. A marriage that was once strong can start feeling strained. Siblings may even argue over who should take on more responsibility for the parents' care. It is not because anyone is ungrateful or unloving. It is simply because adding another person, especially one who needs care, changes the family dynamic. It introduces new responsibilities, new stresses, and new sources of disagreement. This is why it is so important to think about the long-term effects of relying on our children. While they may welcome us with open arms at first, the reality of daily life can turn even the most well-intentioned arrangement into a source of stress. By planning for our own future, whether it is through financial independence, alternative living arrangements, or professional care, we can avoid putting our children in a position where they must choose between their love for us and the health of their own family. Love should bring people together, not create hidden resentments. If we truly care for our children, we must consider not just their willingness to take care of us, but also the long-term impact our presence may have on their lives. Your health needs may become too difficult for your children to handle. Aging is unpredictable. Some people remain active and independent well into their later years, while others face serious health challenges that require constant care. We may hope that our children will always be there to help us, but we must ask ourselves, are they truly prepared to handle the difficulties that come with aging? Many children want to take care of their parents, but they don't always realize what that actually means. They might imagine driving us to doctor's appointments or helping with small household tasks. But what happens when we can no longer walk on our own? When we need help going to the bathroom, getting dressed, or even eating? What happens if we develop a serious illness like dementia, where we may forget who they are, repeat ourselves constantly, or even become aggressive without meaning to? I once knew a strong, independent man who never wanted to be a burden. But in his later years, he suffered a stroke that left him unable to care for himself. His son and daughter-in-law took him in, believing they could manage. At first, they tried their best, lifting him in and out of bed, helping him with basic tasks, and ensuring he took his medication. But as time passed, the reality of caregiving took a toll. His son, who once worked full-time, had to cut back on hours to be home more often. His daughter-in-law, who had never been a nurse, suddenly had to learn how to change bandages, monitor medications, and handle emotional breakdowns. Their nights were filled with interrupted sleep, and their days were filled with endless responsibilities. They had no time for themselves, no privacy, and no rest. They still loved him deeply, but they were exhausted. They felt trapped, unable to live their own lives because they were now full-time caregivers. And though they never said it out loud, he could see the fatigue in their eyes. He could hear the frustration in their voices. And worst of all, he could feel their love turning into obligation. Caring for an aging parent is physically and emotionally demanding. Many people are not trained to provide medical care, and the constant responsibility can lead to burnout, depression, and even resentment. In some cases, elderly parents may end up being neglected, not because their children don't love them, but because their children are simply overwhelmed. This is why it is so important to have a plan in place. Relying solely on family may not be enough. Instead, we should consider professional care options, whether that means hiring a caregiver, moving into an assisted living community, or ensuring we have the financial means to receive proper medical support. We spent our entire lives protecting our children from hardship. We should not force them into a role they are not prepared to handle. The best gift we can give them is the freedom to love us as parents, not to struggle with us as caregivers. Your children deserve to live their own lives. As parents, we dedicate our lives to raising our children. We give them love, guidance, and support, helping them grow into independent adults. But when we reach old age, we must remember one crucial truth. Our children have their own lives to live. They have their own dreams, responsibilities, and families. As much as they may love us, they deserve the freedom to build their own futures without feeling trapped by the weight of our needs. Many parents believe that because they sacrifice so much for their children, it is only fair that their children do the same in return. But love should never be measured in debt. We raised our children not so they would one day take care of us, but so they could thrive and create lives of their own. If we demand too much from them, we risk holding them back instead of lifting them up. I once knew a woman whose daughter was her whole world. She had raised her alone, working tirelessly to provide everything she could. But as the years passed and she grew older, she began expecting her daughter to do the same for her. She discouraged her from moving to another city for work, insisting that she needed her close. She became upset when her daughter spent time with friends instead of staying home to help. She even turned down professional caregiving services, insisting that only her daughter should take care of her. At first, the daughter tried to do everything, working, taking care of her mother, and maintaining her own life. But the stress became overwhelming. She felt guilty whenever she chose herself over her mother. Yet she also felt trapped in a life that was no longer her own. Over time, their relationship suffered. What was once love became responsibility. What was once warmth became obligation. And though the daughter still cared deeply, she couldn't help but feel resentment toward the mother she had once adored. This is what happens when we expect too much from our children. Instead of being a source of love and comfort, we become a weight on their shoulders. Instead of allowing them to visit us with joy, we make them feel duty-bound to stay. And in doing so, we risk losing the very thing we cherish most, their genuine affection. The best way to ensure that our children love and respect us in old age is to give them the freedom to live their own lives. That doesn't mean they won't care for us or help us when we need it, but it does mean that we should not rely on them for everything. We should make plans for our own care, ensure we have financial security, and consider professional assistance when necessary. Our children should visit us because they want to, not because they feel they have to. They should spend time with us out of love, not out of guilt. And the only way to make that happen is to free them from the burden of being our caretakers. If you found this video helpful or thought-provoking, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us create more content like this. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.